If you followed me this far, then you already know how deep the wound runs. You know that my son told me I could stay, but not as family. You know that Anna's eyes followed me like I was an intruder in my own child's home. You know that even the children, sweet as they were, began to echo their parents' words, seeing me less as a grandmother and more as someone who existed only to clean, to fold, to serve. If you're joining only now, let me remind you, I came to this house after losing my husband, hoping for comfort and belonging. At first, I thought I had found it. Laughter, children's hugs, the smell of home-cooked meals filling the air. But slowly, I realized the truth. I was not welcome. And when my son said, "You can stay, but not as family," my heart cracked in a way it has never healed. That is where we left off. And now, dear listener, the time has come to tell you how it all ended. I ask you, stay until the very last word. Because what happened next is something I carried in silence for many years. After Anna's cruel remark that I was not staff, at least not officially, something inside me began to unravel. I moved through the house with heavy steps, doing the same chores, but no longer feeling connected to anything. My body was there, but my spirit was fading. The children still clung to me, but even their love was no longer enough to keep me whole. Every time they repeated their parents' words, "Grandma, Mummy says you should clean this," or "Daddy says you're supposed to cook tonight," I felt my heart shrink a little more. And my son stayed silent. He didn't scold me, but he didn't defend me either. He walked a line that always favored his wife, leaving me stranded on the other side. I began to dream of my old house, the one I had left behind after my husband's death. The walls were cracked, the furniture old, but it had been mine. I dreamed of the quiet, of the garden I once tended, of the smell of roses drifting through an open window. In those dreams, I felt freer than I did in this bustling house where I had become invisible. One afternoon, as I scrubbed the kitchen floor on my knees, I realized the truth. I was no longer living. I was surviving. I had become a ghost of myself, haunting the corners of a house that no longer wanted me. And so, for the first time, I thought seriously about leaving. The thought terrified me. Leaving meant loneliness. Leaving meant silence so heavy it could crush me. Leaving meant walking away from the grandchildren who still clung to me with innocent love. But staying meant death of a different kind. A slow erasure, a fading into nothingness. That night, I sat by the window in my room, holding the photograph of my husband. His smile seemed to whisper courage into me. "What would you do?" I asked him softly. "Would you tell me to endure, or would you tell me to walk away?" The answer didn't come, only silence. But within that silence, I heard my own heart whisper back, "You deserve more than this." The next morning, when I rose to fold their laundry, I looked at the neat stacks of clothes and felt nothing. Not love, not duty, nothing. And I knew in that moment that my time in that house was coming to an end. But how I left, and what happened in those final days, that is the part of the story I have never spoken of until now. The days that followed my decision felt heavier than ever. Each chore, each small act of service, carried a question in my mind. Is this the last time I do this for them? I folded their shirts slowly, memorizing the feel of the fabric beneath my hands. I cooked simple meals, not because anyone asked me to, but because I wanted the children to have one last memory of their grandmother's touch in the kitchen. I swept the floors, knowing that soon the broom would no longer be mine to hold in that house. But with every task, Anna's disapproval grew sharper. "Why did you cook this? I was going to make dinner." Or, "Please don't fold my clothes, I'll do it myself." Her words were no longer disguised by politeness. They were commands, pushing me further into the role of a burden rather than a helper. One evening, as I was tucking the children into bed, my granddaughter whispered, "Grandma, why are you sad?" Her little hand reached for mine in the dark. I forced a smile and said, "I'm not sad, sweetheart, just tired." But the truth was, I had never felt more broken. Later that night, my son entered my room. He sat on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped together. He looked at me with eyes that once held love, but now carried only weariness. "Mom," he said softly, "this isn't working. Anna feels like she has no space here. I can't keep peace between you two anymore." I swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" He sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. "I think maybe it's time you considered other options. Maybe living on your own again." The words hit me harder than I expected, even though I had already thought them myself. My son, my only child, was asking me to leave. Not in anger, but in resignation, as if my presence had become too heavy a weight for him to carry. I nodded, unable to speak. My throat felt like it was closing. He patted my hand awkwardly and said, "We'll help you figure it out. You'll be okay." Then he stood and left, closing the door gently behind him. I sat in silence for a long time after that. The house around me felt foreign, hostile. The laughter from the living room, the clatter of dishes, even the hum of the refrigerator, all of it reminded me that I did not belong there anymore. The next morning, I looked at my grandchildren differently. Every hug, every smile, every story we read together felt like a countdown. How many more nights would I tuck them in? How many more mornings would I hear their giggles in the kitchen? How many more times would they run into my arms before I was no longer there to catch them? I wanted to tell them everything. I wanted to hold them and say, "Your grandmother loves you, but I can't stay here anymore." But how do you explain such things to children? How do you tell them that love isn't always enough to keep a family together under one roof? So I said nothing. I only held them tighter, memorizing their warmth, their laughter, their innocent love that hadn't yet learned the cruelty of exclusion. At night, I pressed my husband's photograph to my chest and whispered, "It's happening, love. He's letting me go. Our boy is letting me walk away from him." The silence gave no answer, but in my heart I already knew the truth. I would leave soon, and when I did, it would not only be the house I left behind, it would be the last fragile piece of the family I once thought I still had. The decision, once made, settled into my chest like a heavy stone. I knew I could not stay. I could not continue shrinking into silence, folding clothes that were no longer mine, cleaning rooms where my presence was resented, living in a house where I had been told I was not family. So, late at night, when the house was quiet, I began to pack. Not much, just the things that truly belonged to me. My husband's photograph, a few dresses, a small box of letters he had written to me in our youth. I packed slowly, carefully, as if each fold of fabric was a farewell. But children see more than we think. The next morning, my grandson entered my room without knocking. His small eyes widened when he saw the half-filled suitcase on the bed. "Grandma," he whispered, "are you going somewhere?" I froze. My hands trembled as I closed the suitcase lid gently. "I'm just organizing things, sweetheart," I said softly, but he looked at me with suspicion, the kind only a child can carry, innocent, yet sharp. That evening, as I tucked them into bed, my granddaughter clung to me tighter than usual. "Don't go away, Grandma," she whispered into my ear. My heart broke at her words. "Who told you that I might leave?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She shook her head quickly. "No one. I just feel it." I kissed her forehead, my tears hidden in the dark. "I will always love you," I whispered, "no matter where I am." The next days were the hardest. Every moment felt like a goodbye. I watched them eat breakfast, memorizing the way they laughed with milk on their lips. I folded their tiny clothes, knowing soon my hands would no longer touch them. I listened to their footsteps running through the house, trying to capture the sound forever in my mind. Anna, perhaps sensing my decision, grew bolder. She didn't hide her satisfaction. When she saw my suitcase, she raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Her silence was approval enough. My son avoided me more than ever. He came home late, spent his evenings in the living room with Anna, and rarely entered my room. When he did, he spoke in short, careful sentences, as if he couldn't bear to face the truth of what he had done. One night, I decided to speak. He was sitting at the kitchen table, his face lit only by the glow of his phone. I sat across from him and said quietly, "I'll be leaving soon." He didn't look up. He only nodded, his jaw tight. After a long pause, he said, "Maybe it's for the best, Mom." Those words carved into me deeper than any insult could. For the best. For whom? For him, for Anna, for their peace. But not for me. Never for me. When I returned to my room, I collapsed onto the bed, clutching my husband's photograph. "He has let me go," I whispered into the silence. "Our boy has let me go." And yet, even in my grief, I knew I was right. Staying would have destroyed what little dignity I had left. Leaving, though it would break me, was the only way to keep even a fragment of myself alive. Still, one thought haunted me endlessly. How would my grandchildren remember me? As the grandmother who loved them deeply, or as the woman who quietly disappeared from their lives, suitcase in hand? The night before I left, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the half-packed suitcase, the photograph of my husband, and the walls that had heard my quiet sobs too many times. I ran my hand over the worn fabric of the suitcase as if it were a lifeline. Tomorrow, I would no longer live here. Tomorrow, this house would carry on without me. At dawn, I rose quietly. The house was still. I moved slowly, afraid that even my breathing would wake them. I zipped the suitcase, lifted it with trembling hands, and placed it by the door. But children always wake early. My granddaughter's small voice pierced the silence. "Grandma?" She stood at the top of the stairs, rubbing her sleepy eyes. When she saw the suitcase, her face crumpled. "You're leaving." I froze. My heart ached as she ran down the stairs and threw her arms around my waist. "Don't go, Grandma. Please don't go." I held her close, my tears spilling onto her hair. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "I will always love you. No matter where I am, I will always be your grandmother." My grandson joined us then, his face pale with worry. "Why, Grandma? Did we do something wrong?" I shook my head quickly, pulling them both into my arms. "No, my darlings, you did nothing wrong. You gave me more love than you will ever know. But sometimes adults make choices that children can't change." Their small bodies shook against me as they cried, and I thought my heart would break in two. But I knew I couldn't stay, not after everything. Anna appeared in the doorway then, her arms crossed. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me everything. She was waiting for me to leave. And then my son came. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a hard line. He avoided my eyes as he said, "It's time, Mom." Those words, cold, final, were the last I heard from him in that house. I bent down to kiss the children's cheeks, memorizing their warmth, their tears, the way their tiny hands clung to mine. "Be good," I whispered, "and never forget, your grandmother loves you." Then I lifted my suitcase, walked past my son, and stepped out the door. The morning air hit me like a wave, cool and sharp, washing away the last remnants of the life I had tried to hold on to. As I walked down the street, the house behind me growing smaller, I realized something. I was alone again. Just as I had been when I buried my husband. Just as I would be for the rest of my days. But I also realized this. Sometimes leaving is not weakness. Sometimes it is the only way to keep your dignity, the only way to survive when love has been replaced by silence. And now, dear listener, I want to ask you one last time. If you were in my place, if your own child told you that you could stay, but not as family, what would you do? Would you endure, clinging to what little connection remains? Or would you walk away, carrying your broken heart but keeping your dignity? Tell me in the comments. Your words matter more than you think. Someone out there may hear them and find the courage they need. Because I left. I walked away, suitcase in hand, heart in pieces. And though I lost the home I had hoped to find, I kept the only thing I had left, myself.